On this episode of Public Scrutiny, we'll take a look at Andrew Neil as he talks trade with a French MEP.
Now, Boris Johnson made a speech on Monday laying out the government's vision for a future relationship with the EU based on a free trade agreement like the one the EU already has with Canada. Earlier, I spoke to the French MEP and former Europe Minister, Nathalie Loiseau. She's on the UK contact group of MEPs who have been consulted on the negotiations. Nathalie Loiseau, Boris Johnson wants a Canada-style free trade agreement with the EU. Is the EU prepared to negotiate on that basis?
Well, we just had the first meeting of the UK coordination group in the European Parliament discussing with Michel Barnier. There is a will for an ambitious partnership with the United Kingdom. There was a strong sense of unity among the members of the European Parliament to propose an ambitious partnership and at the same time, which has to be free and fair, which means that the single market will be open if and only if there is no dumping from the British side.
Sometimes in life we look at things and we ask, am I actually seeing this? She says that they just had a first meeting, like it's a whole new thing, adding that there's a strong sense of unity and will for an ambitious partnership, but states that it has to be free and fair. No, it doesn't. Free trade is a mechanism, fair trade is an option. There's nothing that says we have to trade fairly. To give them a level playing field means that we can't compete against them. It's a financial rope around a nation's neck. Can you imagine the EU making the same demand of the USA? Free trade, yes, but you can't be our competitor. What if the EU goes into further decline? I don't know if anyone's noticed, but the EU is on fire and sinking. Treasure Island just broke free. We are Treasure Island and they are the pirates.
So if the EU is prepared to go down the Canada route, and I'm not clear from your answer that it is, but if it is, why is the EU insisting that the UK has to follow existing and future Brussels rules? I mean, that's not in the Canada Free Trade Agreement. It's not in the one you have with Japan or the one you have with South Korea.
If I remember correctly, the UK is not Canada, it's not Japan, and it's not Korea. It's been a member state, it's very close to the European Union, and our interests are really linked. So it's up to the British government to decide. If the notion is only Canada, it means that it's not zero tariff, zero quota.
She points out that we're not Canada or any of the other separate nations that the EU has deals with. I think we're expecting something bespoke, as per the other nations. But she's letting us know that we are not of the same status as those other nations, and that as we've already been harvested, as we've been a member of the EU before, there is no way that they would honour us in the same way they would a nation that they hadn't taken over.
Well, it's pretty much zero tariffs. It's pretty much zero tariffs. 98% of goods traded between Canada and the EU have no tariffs.
And parts of services are not included in CETA. Well, it's really up to the UK to decide what sort of relationship they want with the European Union. But it will come with consequences on the openness of our market. It will really be balance between rights and obligations. And we are deeply convinced that the most profitable relationship would be that we follow the same path in terms of protection of the environment or protection of workers.
Aside from the fact that so far she hasn't mentioned anything that I would accept or agree to, one thing about this from both sides that concerns me is the environmental alignment. This includes all the carbon laws, light bulbs, car exhaust. The list really is too long, but environmental policies encompass nearly all the other policies. Not only that, nations who sign up to global environmental treaties are allowing a supranational non-governmental structure to determine national policy on a domestic level. So of course I think we should ditch that as well.
It's a political choice that you will be making.
But it seems
if
that
you want to diverge, you are sovereign, that's your right.
It seems
but
that
it will
Mr.
not
Johnson,
be the same relation with the European Union.
It seems that Mr. Johnson has made his choice. He wants a comprehensive Canadian-style free trade agreement, and if that means that there has to be some alignment, he'd rather have it less comprehensive. That's the British position now.
Well, if it is clear, we will adjust, but let us not compare Canada, which signed an agreement with the European Union in order to converge with the European Union, and the United Kingdom, which is willing to negotiate in order to diverge. This is very different, and it means that our position will be very simply to protect our citizens, to protect our businesses, and to protect the consistency of the single market.
The EU can only just about survive in its current form as long as nothing else happens. All it takes is one thing, like a German bank going under, and the entire structure falls. And yet in absolute terms, the EU has nothing to offer us.
And believe me, it is the interest of the UK to have a well-functioning single market, because this is the destination of most of your experts.
If 98% of British businesses don't trade with the EU, they're not going to care about the single market. So there's nothing there for nearly all of us. In fact, it could be said that we've endured everything the EU has thrown at us just so that 2% of our businesses could trade with it. Was it worth it? Selling out an entire nation for that?
Not most of our exports, it's about 45%. The EU is also insisting that any agreement has to be subject to the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. Can you point to any other EU free trade deal where that's a condition?
There is a good reason for which we need the Court of Justice. It's because you are still abiding by the European law. You are in the transition period.
No, but this will be after the transition period.
There will be a need to interpret the...
This will be afterwards. What the EU is saying is that if we do a free trade deal, if there's any disagreement subsequently about how either side's behaving, it's the European Court of Justice that does the arbitration. Give me another free trade deal you've done with anybody, which includes the ECJ.
If it is about interpreting the European law, there is not another body that is entitled to interpret the European law than the European Court of Justice.
But the ECJ does not play a role in the EU-Canadian free trade deal.
Because Canada never abided by the European law. That's a huge difference. You're not Canada, once again.
It would seem that you...
No, madam. We are Great Britain. We've a long and proud history, and we will still be here long after the EU is gone. Besides, we'll be linking up with our brothers and sisters in Canada and the rest of the Commonwealth very soon. There's 2.5 billion people in the Commonwealth. Sorry, you were saying?
Not really willing to go down the Canada road. You want the ECJ to have a role. You want us to continue to remain aligned with Brussels rules, even though we would have no say over them. That's really what you want, isn't it?
We want to have the best possible relationship. And for your businesses to be able to work with the single market in the best profitable way for them is to have the same rules, the same norms. Otherwise, there are going to be more and more controls, more and more barriers, and I'm not sure it's good for your businesses.
Well,
and I'm sure it's not good for the single market.
It's the smile on her face as she belittles us. She's absolutely no right to display such arrogance. The EU has no negotiating position as far as I can see. The only thing of interest to us is the single market, but the price is way too high. I'm surprised that this is their position. The only thing on offer is Brexit in name only as a trade deal. If rejoining all of its institutions is the ambitious direction they're travelling in, then it's the EU who have offered us no deal.
But we won't be in the single market anymore. We will have a free trade relationship. So I don't quite understand where the level playing field comes in here. But if we're going to have one, for the sake of a free trade agreement, would the EU be prepared to level up to UK standards?
What is interesting in our conversation is that we never had this conversation before your election.
One thing she did say that I agree with is that we are actually seeing what happens when a nation negotiates its exit from a bloc. We didn't see this during the reign of treasonous May. I guess future does prove past.
I would like to know whether British voters were well informed that the will of this government was to diverge on environment, on state aids or on labour laws from the European Union. We have to have coherence between us.
Well, let's look at some coherence. The UK enjoys 39 weeks of paid maternity leave. France, you only get 16. France spends twice as much on state aid to businesses.
That's the only example that you keep on repeating.
France, France spends twice as much on state aid as the United Kingdom.
I was not aware that I was talking to the spokesperson.
So would you level up to our standards on these matters?
Spokesperson of Boris Johnson. I wonder if the UK is so much willing to be ambitious in terms of labour law and on environment, why a coherence with the European Union should be a problem. But don't imagine that Brexit comes with no consequence. Don't ask for the benefits of Norway with the constraints of Canada. It will not work.
But the British government, rightly or wrongly, the British government isn't asking for the benefits of Norway because Norway is in the single market and the British government has made it clear it doesn't want to be in the single market. It's also made it clear it doesn't want to continue with alignment of EU rules. Let me finish the question. It's also certain it won't agree to the jurisdiction of the ECJ. When you look at all that and you look at the EU position, isn't no deal becoming more likely?
Well, I listened carefully to your Prime Minister saying that it will be a Canada deal or an Australian deal. It was a strange way of mentioning that he was rushing to a no deal.
But in your view, is no deal becoming more likely?
But this could be your choice. I always thought that it was a possibility, and the European Union always prepared itself for this scenario, which would be bad for the EU and terrible for the UK.
I mean, it's generally agreed that no deal would not be good for Britain. I understand that. But the Eurozone is stagnating. France is rocked by strikes and unrest. Germany is in industrial recession. Italy is in an economic recession. Are you sure that the EU could afford no deal?
I'm surprised that a journalist doesn't know that there are no strikes anymore in France, but that's not a problem. We are going to pass important reforms, and we have one of the highest growth rates of the Eurozone.
You had 2 months of strikes, and you've had a year of the Gilets jaunes.
Yes, and we survived it, even with the strong growth rates.
Note what she said. She almost insulted him professionally in her rebuttal. There are no strikes in France. And as soon as he points out that they were, she moves straight past being caught in error and into a defence of how well the strikes were handled, despite previously saying that there were none. Why on earth would you want that managing your affairs?
Which means that we are very strong in terms of economic terms. But you're very right. I'm not sure we can afford to play this game of hurting each other. I do believe that a strong partnership is preferable to any sort of no deal, and we stand ready for an ambitious offer. And for this, it takes 2 to tango.
Nathalie Loiseau, thank you for joining us on that. I hope we can get a chance to talk again as these negotiations get underway.
My pleasure.
And with that, I'll end this video there. If you've enjoyed it, give it a like as it really helps. And if you want to hear more, you can subscribe. Later.